encased in metal armour.
Like an ancient tank, the camel would have been encased in armour and sent charging into enemy lines, causing utter disruption and chaos. But comparisons to the tank do not stop there. The camel could also be turned into a mobile gun unit.
This is a camel gun. Essentially, it's a light cannon designed to go on the back of a camel, and it was used as mobile artillery in the battlefield. It's a very successful design because essentially you can transport artillery, albeit of small calibre, over very difficult terrain quite cheaply. So it was a very effective means of bringing firepower to bear in portions of the world where such artillery wasn't expected.
And it was an extremely effective tool once it had arrived on the battlefield.
The Persian name for it is Zambarek, which means little wasp, which gives a very good indication of its battlefield role. Essentially, it was designed to harass and annoy the enemy, firing at them at a range where they couldn't actually respond.
Ultimately, the camel's sheer size, coupled with the additions of guns and armour, made it into a twisted weapon in its own right. It became an integral part of the armies of the East, and would remain so until modern times. But the twisted ways the commanders of the ancient East used to attack their enemies meant the invention of weapons that defy the imagination. Next, ancient Indian martial artists and their terrifying arsenal of weapons. The vibrant fabric of Indian life contains a hidden thread of terrifying and brutal weapons. A throwing device that could sever a man's limb. A sword that history tells us killed 9 men in one attack. And a booby trap that could have inspired a Hollywood film. These are the twisted weapons of ancient India. There is a 16th century Indian text called the Akbarnama.
These things are very often wonderfully illustrated with superb miniatures in extreme detail which show armour and weaponry and all the slightly, particularly in Mughal India, slightly bizarre weaponry that they tended to go in for.
An illustration of a battle described in the Akbarnama clearly shows what looks like circular metal objects being used as weapons. What are these frisbee-like devices the warriors are using? Investigations point towards a weapon known as the chakra, an ancient Indian projectile. Nidar Singh is a member of the Sikh warrior tribe known as the Akali Nihang. They were the front line of the Sikh army created in the early 17th century.
Akali Nihang is a traditional vanguard of the Sikh nation. They're the defenders of the Sikh faith. They were employed as personal bodyguards by the Sikh gurus and employed as guards of Sikh temples. And it's their special weapon, the chakra.
The chakra varied in size from 5 to 12 inches in diameter and were up to an inch in width. The Akali Nihang would send a barrage of these ancient steel projectiles into enemy ranks to break up the front lines of their formations. Deployed in every battle the Sikhs fought for over 300 years, it was the signature weapon of these ancient commandos.
So what we have is almost a flat ring. So the bottom is slightly flat, slightly asymmetric curve here, gives you a bit of airfoil, and what you have with outer edge is sharp as possible. So the idea is when it's thrown, at any single point where it touches, it will cut. So rather than a conventional throwing knife that can only do damage with one single point, the idea of a chakra is that it doesn't matter where he hits, it will do damage with. And as he spins, it digs through, cuts through. So he may hit here, but spinning, it widens the wound, digs in further.
An account from a traveller to ancient India, Duarte Barbosa, reveals the startling ways in which the chakra was used. And they carry 7 or 8 of these each, put on the left arm, and they take one and put it on the finger of the right hand and make it spin round many times. And so they hurl it at their enemies, and if they hit anyone on the arm or leg or neck, it cuts through all. Would it be possible for the chakra to actually sever a limb, as Barbosa wrote? In ancient times, the Sikhs would use sugarcane to test their weapons.
Traditionally, they consider sugarcane to be the same consistency of bones. So even in Sikh rituals, where they do sacrifices and so on to the goddess Chandi. They employ sugar canes to represent limbs.
To test the chakra, sugar cane will be used in keeping with the practices of the ancient Sikhs. Will the chakra be able to cut through a limb? Through our investigations, we have discovered that Barbossa's account was true. The ancient Indian engineers created a weapon capable of slicing through a man's limb. But delving deeper into ancient texts, a shocking story can be found which seems to be too impossible to be true. How did a single warrior kill 9 people in only one attack using an ancient steel whip? In searching for answers, researchers have rediscovered a martial art that was lost to the world for centuries, Kalari Payattu. The birthplace of this ancient fighting technique is Kerala in southern India. Guru Dinashan has been practicing Kalari Payattu for over 30 years. He's one of the foremost experts in the world.
The
3,000-year-old Kalari Payattu is considered to be the mother of all forms of martial arts across the world.
This ancient martial art has an arsenal of weapons, but there's one that is unique. It's called the urumi, a weapon made of flexible steel that is less than 1/10 of an inch thick, so it behaves more like a whip than a sword.
The urumi is made from the same kind of metal used to make clock springs. Usually this metal would be softened to suit the urumi.
It was widely used in ancient India not only by people settling personal differences, but also in official disputes where a warrior from either side would be chosen to battle it out in one-to-one combat.
Generally, a sword can only kill a single person at once, whereas the urumi can be used to attack a number of people at the same time.
This was when the weapon was most useful, when a single warrior was forced to take on several opponents. A story from medieval India illustrates this perfectly. In 16th century Kerala, the Indian warrior Thacholi Othanan and the eldest brother of 9 from a local family squared up to settle a dispute. Armed with their urumis, they engaged in battle. Othanan soon realized he faced a superior foe.
In ancient times, Kalari Payattu was used to resolve a difference of opinion. The fight lasts until either warrior dies.
Othanan had no choice but to retreat if he was to escape with his life. But his pride was wounded. He had to avenge his honor. Attacking later under the cover of darkness, the ancient account tells us that he killed all 9 of the brothers with his urumi. Could this be possible? Could the urumi enable one man to kill 9 single-handedly? Gurukal Dinashan has enlisted the help of one of his students to investigate the truth of this ancient Indian story. Could Thacholi Othanan have sliced through all 9 brothers in just one attack? 9 targets have been set up to represent the 9 brothers that Othanan attacked. Gurukal's student will attack them only once, just as Othanan did. In order to avoid hurting himself with the urumi, Gurukal's student must constantly twist the urumi around his body in an almost vertical plane. Using this method, as Othanan would have done too, it will be possible to test the veracity of this ancient Indian story. In only one attack with his urumi, Gurukal's student has destroyed all 9 targets. If these had been people, they would have stood little chance against this terrifying weapon.
The test has shown that it is possible that Thacholi Othanan could have killed 9 people at once using this method.
Through our investigations, we've discovered that this ancient Indian story is credible. The vicious effectiveness of the urumi is such that one man could kill 9 single-handedly. Journeying deep into India's past, it's possible to uncover perhaps the most twisted weapon of all. In the early 3rd century BC, a young commander called Chandragupta rid India of foreign invaders. He became India's first emperor at the tender age of 20, establishing the largest kingdom ever to rule over the region, the Mauryan Empire.
The Mauryan Empire included a vast geographical area. It consisted of most of the states of current India and some of Pakistan as well.
But once he had freed India, he installed his own reign of terror that was far worse than that of the foreign invaders. Chandragupta's rule was guided by a military and political treatise called the Arthasastra. It's a Machiavellian masterpiece containing countless methods of murdering your enemy. Ancient Discoveries has tracked down one of the few remaining copies, hidden in a manuscripts library in southern India. No television crew from outside India has ever been allowed access to this treasure trove of forgotten texts. It holds one of the oldest copies of the Arthasastra in the world, transcribed from the original over 600 years ago. Within the pages of this ancient text, there is one paragraph in particular which highlights its brutality. Or he should make him drop down by the release of a pin into a well with spikes, or a pit underneath the bed or seat where the floor is fixed by a mechanism.
The bed booby trap has been described in the Arthasastra. The trap was made by making a hole under the bed or sofa of an enemy. The hole is filled with spikes, operated by a mechanical device. The enemy was made to fall suddenly and was killed. This trap was adopted to kill powerful enemies with ease.
One problem with investigating this booby trap is that it was a stealth weapon.
The details of the bed booby trap were always kept a secret.
Because of this secrecy, there are no accounts that tell us when Chandragupta actually used this device. With the sparse information available to him, Richard Windley is investigating this ancient instrument of terror. He's come to the Ancient Discoveries Testing Centre in order to build a full-size model. But first, he must construct a smaller prototype to help him understand how the trapdoor mechanism functioned.
This is my little model of the Chandragupta booby trap bed. It's a very, very simple little model. The account that we've got is fleeting. There's only a mention of this device, so we're working by supposition, really. We've got basically a kind of trapdoor, which is probably something similar to a stage trapdoor mechanism, a long cord which would trigger it. The top represents the floor of the room. This would probably have been furnished quite opulently, and there may have been rugs and textiles covering the floor, which would help to hide the trapdoor. But it could also be arranged, like I've done it here, so that the gaps align with the floorboard, so it wouldn't be too obvious. So the bed is attached to the trapdoor, it's hinged, and underneath there's a little catch mechanism. The operators of the device then give a really sharp tug on this rope. This releases the catches. The bed drops, the body falls straight onto the spikes below, and they would hit these spikes with great force. This could penetrate the body, it could penetrate the skull, it could penetrate all sorts of internal organs. So the chances are this guy is going to be dead almost instantaneously.
But how would this device have been employed?
I think it's pretty unlikely that this would have been set up in an enemy's house, because you'd need really full access to the property. It would probably take a team of workmen several days at the very least to set up something like this. It'd be very, very difficult to do this surreptitiously. So I think it's more likely that this would actually have been installed in one of Chandragupta's own palaces.
An enemy who had been invited as a guest would settle down to sleep, never to wake up again.
Politically, this might be a kind of expedient way of removing people. Once the trapdoor's back in place, the catches are reset, only someone inside the room would actually know what had happened, so anyone coming in perhaps in the morning would just find everything exactly as it was the previous night, but the victim has just simply disappeared.
Now that he's understood how the booby trap works, Richard has been able to build a full-size replica and is going to test it out for the first time in over 2,000 years.
We've had a full-size replica of the model built. The bed is a normal full-size bed, about 6 feet long, roughly 3 feet wide. We've got the trapdoor installed, and we've got a drop of about 10 feet and some very, very nasty spikes. So what we really need to do now is to actually test this device and just to see how lethal it actually is.
Seeing this weapon as its inventor intended, we can begin to appreciate the gruesome fate that would have awaited anyone who fell victim to it. Richard is placing melons on the bed in order to demonstrate its destructive power.
Well, really, you've only got to take a look at this horrendous mess here to imagine what this would do to a human body. It seems a pretty remote chance that you could possibly survive this. It could easily impale the skull, the major organs, it could sever major arteries. You can imagine the limbs being impaled on it. It is absolutely horrible. It doesn't really bear thinking about.
The horrific death this weapon inflicted would have immediately been hidden to the world as the trapdoor was pulled shut again. The carnage below the surface would be concealed and the body removed, ready for the next unfortunate enemy of this ancient Indian emperor.
Even in a time that seems to us harsh and barbaric, a device like this seems excessive. This seems to be like the product really of a twisted mind.
From the deserts of Arabia to the battlefields of ancient China, our investigations into the ancient East reveal a history of twisted and macabre weapons. As explorations into these forgotten corners of the world continue, what other twisted tools of terror lie waiting to be discovered?